The Tomlinson Report promises a brave new world for the education of England's 14 to 19-year-olds. Students like these awarded a single diploma, the result of following a personalised syllabus, gaining credit for sport and hobbies, and crucially, blending their academic study with vocational training. But has Tomlinson got it right? Can a grand unified theory of education be made to work? It may rest on pillars of wisdom, but England's secondary education system is in crisis. The crisis takes three forms. Firstly, for pupils aged 14 to 16, pillars of wisdom have all too often become the bars of a prison. Too many find school boring and irrelevant.
There just isn't enough to keep these kids interested in school, and they're switched off from it, and we have to cope with it every day.
Clacton school leaver Luke Saxelby is a victim of England's failing secondary sector. At 16, he was one of the 50,000 pupils who each year sit their GCSEs and get out of full-time education for good.
I wasn't really happy with it. I didn't see any future for myself in it. I'd really just had enough of the whole school environment.
Luke's experience is not unique. Along with the high dropout rate comes low attainment. Almost a half of 16-year-olds get fewer than 5 GCSE grades A to C. Around 5% leave with no qualifications at all. Saxelby, for one, blames poor teaching and irrelevant subjects for his plight.
The problem with the teaching was that some of us were left behind. If you weren't up with the highest in the actual class, you were sort of left lagging behind because they wanted to get them people ahead, really. Those were the ones they focused on, while the rest were kind of like shuffled to the back.
2 years after leaving school, Luke Saxelby still faces an uncertain future. He believes the education system has let him down.
Do I feel let down by the school? Yes, I do. I'd definitely say my prospects have been harmed by leaving school early. It's difficult to get a job when you haven't got any real qualifications.
Post-GCSE, the secondary education crisis changes focus. Students aged 16 up are broadly happy. They have opted to stay on. The burden instead weighs harder upon universities and teachers.
Yeah, Abigail. Getting on here,
Modularised A-levels leave too many exams, too much red tape. The result? Teachers struggling to cope.
It places a huge sort of bureaucratic burden upon teachers in terms of absorbing all the syllabuses and trying to work out how to deliver your lessons. So, you know, in many schools I've encountered teachers who've just collapsed with the stress of it.
A-level modules can be chopped and changed and retaken. Exam inflation, in its turn, has triggered grade inflation, and that means universities are finding it harder to distinguish between applicants.
It's actually easier, I think, to do a course in steps, so they've led to a great increase in the proportion of young people getting the top grades. And in a sense that's good, but of course it means the information that the leading universities are receiving is less differentiated, so it's harder to make fairer decisions.
Grade inflation may also be masking a drop in standards.
Too many people are getting an A for an A to mean anything. We need to change that.
At A level, A grades are topping 22%. Yet Exam Board OCR reported in 2004 that many papers contain sloppy grammar, malapropisms, slang and even phone text shorthand. Not a new problem. But with grades even higher, better basic grammar should surely come as standard. For one teacher at least, it's all too much.
We've got huge swathes of pupils leaving school who can't read and write, who are totally disillusioned. Our schools are failing pupils day in, day out, year after year. And it has been a national disaster.
Yet the pupils the system is failing most are the ones who have moved away from academic learning and ventured instead into vocational training. 16 to 19-year-olds who enter the vocational sector do so at their peril. All too often, they run the risk of being caught in a maze of qualification pathways that simply meet a dead end.
We haven't been very good with vocational education in this country. You have areas of study, but you don't have young people drawn forward, as it were, along a pathway, knowing that if they get a qualification, that they'll be more likely to get a job.
The pathways to a vocational qualification are bewildering. NVQs, GNVQs, BTECs, VCEs, E2E, apprenticeships, and for those who make it that far, foundation degrees.
There are far too many qualifications. Working out what each one means is incredibly difficult.
All in all, students are confronted by no less than 5,000 qualifications available from over 100 awarding bodies.
To put it bluntly, it's Mickey Mouse, isn't it?
This system is the product of well-intentioned efforts stretching back decades to address a fundamental prejudice: the traditional view that vocational education somehow comes second best to real academic learning.
Vocational education has been too often poorly regarded in this country. And that, I think, comes from schools trying to find something for the less brainy to do. So we have vocational education tinged with this idea of being second class.
But the vast array of qualifications now on offer has simply undermined the status of vocational training even more. Employers doubt the value of so much paper, especially when they faced applicants who seem to lack even the most basic skills.
Young people at the moment don't come to us with all of the skills that we would be looking for. And some of the skills that they lack are things like basic numeracy, basic literacy, but the ability to really communicate, and that's, in a business like BT, that's absolutely vital.
11% of English FE colleges have meanwhile failed their Ofsted inspections. Teachers are under-trained, institutions under-equipped.
We do not have the resources. So, for example, at the moment, I'm teaching a bunch of sort of disaffected kids who are all vocationally talented, vocational education. And I've got to grovel on my hands and knees almost, literally, i.e. sweeping the workshop after me, to get some space to work with them. And these are the kids I'm supposed to be teaching about the world of work.
It seems many 14 to 19-year-old students are stuck on a road to nowhere, glimpsing tantalising chances of success that remain frustratingly out of reach. Most professionals agree on the problems, but how to reach a solution provokes passionate debate. Enter the Tomlinson Report, a series of proposals designed to fix England's ailing secondary system in one fell swoop. Compiled by former Chief Schools Inspector Mike Tomlinson, the report is bold, it's wide-ranging, and it's provocative. Many broadly welcomed it, including Ofsted Chief David Bell.
I made it very clear on the day of publication of Mike Tomlinson's report that I thought the government should implement in full his recommendations. And I think this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to say we need to improve our education system for all young people.
What the Tomlinson recommendations will do is give us the opportunity to create that coherent system which will meet the needs of all our young people and will provide us with a system which is fit for the 21st century.
Tomlinson promises a root and branch series of reforms. Controversially, and yet to be endorsed by the government, the replacing of GCSEs and A-levels with a single 4-level diploma. At the heart of the new diploma, a compulsory core of key skills. And the blending of academic learning with vocational training. The diploma will mean fewer exams and an increase in teacher-led course assessment, including a dissertation-style extended project. Also included, a record of non-curricular activity that brings credits to the final diploma grade. Students will also be encouraged to design their own syllabus, drawing from a range of core and main subjects.
We believe that Tomlinson, in creating this much more unified approach in which there are progression opportunities for all, regardless of the mix of elements that they want to take, will go a long way towards creating a more equitable situation.
It's an enticing prospect. Teachers relieved of their exam burden. Pupils from 14 learning what they want in the way they want. A personal syllabus for every individual, where all forms of learning are equally valued. But there remains a nagging question. Will it work?
I think Tomlinson is pitching at the wrong level. He's trying to unify something which is intrinsically diversified.
Critics say Tomlinson contains fundamental errors of approach. Error number 1. By trying to include everyone and everything, Tomlinson's diploma will become meaningless.
Tomlinson, basically it's a certificate for everyone, isn't it? It's a certificate for being a nice person, essentially. And that's not satisfactory because it doesn't give people an accurate picture as to what's going on in education, and it gives pupils a false view of what they're actually attaining.
Diploma, what does it mean? What's its value? Because in some cases it's something that somebody gets because they've attended, in some cases it's a high qualification. What does it mean? Employers need that certainty that this is this value.
Error number 2, according to critics. Tomlinson puts an unacceptable burden of choice onto students' shoulders.
It's passing the buck to pupils, getting them to choose a pathway. I think they call it a learning line, which will become the new lingo, won't it, if it goes through, at 14. And I don't feel that a 14-year-old is fully equipped to choose what sort of subjects they should be studying. I think that we should be having a vision of what we want our pupils to know.
Error number 3. The diploma delivery system is needlessly complex.
It will be almost impossible to move in the school without having what you've done noted down. You won't be able to do anything for pleasure. You'll be getting marks towards your transcript of achievement.
But the heaviest firepower is reserved for the jewel in Tomlinson's crown, the magic ingredient that aims to win back tens of thousands of dispirited students. The plan to blend both academic and vocational pathways together. Back in Clacton, the idea of blending the two certainly has appeal for disaffected school leaver Luke Saxelby.
I'd have preferred to have studied more practical stuff, woodwork and IT, maths that would actually be useful once you left, stuff that you could take out into the real world, rather than a bunch of stuff that you probably never use again.
But critics argue that a blend of academic and vocational study puts an emphasis on basic skills that will shortchange the academically inclined.
Key skills of being made the core of our diploma. There are as many points awarded for what Tomlinson calls functional literacy and numeracy as are awarded for an A2 qualification. This is grossly out of proportion and will distort the learning up to 19.
What's more, academic study and vocational training are like chalk and cheese, not meant to be mixed.
Well, it's very foolish because academic and vocational have different organising principles. Academic studies are organised around different ways of knowing the world. Vocational studies are organised around being able to do things.
In short, say critics, Tomlinson's grand unified theory of education fails to recognise both the realities of teaching and the nature of learning. Professor Alan Smithers believes vocational training should be kept distinct from academic study. He feels we need a system built on celebrating the value of each. Only then will students break out of the vocational maze. The best way forward, Smithers argues, is to ditch Tomlinson and draw on the vocational training experience of other countries, principally Germany.
I like the German system. People with vocational qualifications are very highly valued because there's a clear program of study. The young people get a qualification that is recognised by the employers. In some cases, they can only enter an area if they have that qualification.
Don't let its gingerbread exterior fool you. The facade of this typical trade school in Munich conceals a high-tech hothouse. If Smithers is right, the system in place here offers a viable alternative to Tomlinson. Many of the 1,200 students here are learning automotive engineering. They've come through Germany's three-tier education system and, at 15 or 16, have chosen to follow a vocational pathway.
The German system is traditionally a three-way system. That means after a common time in the primary school, between the ages of 6 and 10, you then go to the gymnasium, which is something like a grammar school without entry exam, or you go to a general secondary school or an intermediate school. That means 70% of each year follow a sort of general training up to the age of 15 or 16, which is then followed by a vocational training in the proper sense.
Students spend 2 weeks out of 3 training on the job in a real workplace. A sure sign of who calls the tune in the German vocational sector. Lesson number 1 for Alan Smithers: put employers in charge.
The involvement of employers is absolutely vital. You can invent all sorts of things for young people to do and call it vocational, and they'll work hard and they'll get a qualification and they'll find that it's absolutely no help at all in the marketplace. And there's been a lot of that in the past. Employers need to be in the driving seat.
Students in Munich sign a contract with their employer. This binds them to an intensive 3-year period of study. At the end, they become qualified car mechanics. Their certification is vital to securing a job. For England, making vocational qualifications a licence to practice is lesson number 2, according to Alan Smithers.
A licence to practice would make vocational qualifications really valuable, because that would give them point. It would mean that they were something striving for, and it would mean that you could do things that you couldn't do without that qualification.
Studies in a trade school are intense. Courses consist of an amalgam of hydraulics, pneumatics, electronics, diagnostics, and a dozen other disciplines. Staff in Munich call it mechatronics. Classes range from the intensely practical to the purely theoretical.
Our students, of course, need a very strong theoretical basis, which we teach in such a standard classroom situation.
These students are exploring the physics of fuel consumption. Leading the class, not a teacher, but a machine. This simulator allows students to analyse different driving scenarios and compare differing levels of fuel efficiency. It's linked to workstations on every desk. Across the corridor, an electronics class.
We are doing a basic training so they will be able to use an oscilloscope in the engine tester.
I'll show you another classroom. Might interest you. It's engine tuning.
The facilities in Munich would make an average English FE college weep. Funding for trade schools comes from both the municipal authority and from employers via their own craft associations. In Germany, vocational training is taken very seriously. Lesson number 3 for England: create a climate of respect for vocational training.
But we generally regard the vocational training as the backbone of the German economy, because the German economy consists mainly of small and medium-sized companies, and they very strongly rely on well-trained and highly qualified staff.
Car mechanics is just one of 360 qualifications open to German vocational students. A far cry from the thousands on offer under the present English system. Lesson number 4. Streamline and standardise our vocational qualifications.
Also wir sind dabei, aus diesen 2 Gleichungen.
But the news from Germany is not all good. To the English eye, German teaching methods look distinctly pedestrian.
Our students get such a leading text. They work it through step by step, and after they have finished it, they will have all knowledge we ask them for after such a lesson.
Every class methodically works through the same text, the same exercises, in the same way. This rigidity of work perhaps spills over into rigidity of thought. Critics of the German system argue that by corralling students into separate pathways relatively early in their career, the system pigeonholes talent, stifling individuals, clipping the wings of youth at the very moment it needs encouragement to fly. So is it possible to promote personal development and effective vocational training? Vocational training consultant Paul Goodchild broadly welcomes Tomlinson's vision of personalised learning, but believes the diploma is not the best way to deliver it. Goodchild's dream: to import a radical idea that seems to harness the spirit of Tomlinson, yet values distinct and vibrant vocational training in its own right. The idea comes from Denmark. For over a century, Danish 14 to 18-year-olds who wish to pursue a broadly vocational path have opted to spend a year of their secondary education in an after school, a residential centre that aims to provide a life skills transition from adolescence to adulthood and bridge the academic vocational divide.
In the after-school context, or the life skills college context, students living together in this mini society of peers with an emphasis on cooperation, self-management, maintaining their own environment, doing all the painting and decorating, the cleaning, the cooking, etc. It gives them a sense of the ownership of the means of education. It gives them a sense of active citizenship that they will never experience anywhere else in the education system.
25,000 students currently attend nearly 250 Danish after-schools. Good Child passionately believes the system could work in the UK. English after-schools, or life skills colleges, would follow a threefold curriculum based on wisdom, work and fun, which combines academic, vocational and non-curricular activities in a controlled environment, away from mainstream schooling.
So there's lots of opportunities to manage their own environment and to create that sense of fun alongside the work, and then the wisdom takes care of itself because they're learning all of the time.
The Danish after-schools track record is highly successful, but the UK version could founder on funding. In Denmark, employers and parents must contribute towards the cost of a placement, and that's why the idea may not win much support here. But who knows what the future holds? The Tomlinson debate has only just begun, and as long as it runs, students like Luke Saxelby will continue to lose out on education. For him, the Tomlinson proposals have come too late.
You're always going to have losers in society, I suppose, but I think everyone should be on more of a level playing field. Fairer overall wages, and Tomlinson sounds all right with vocational education and actually getting a diploma from it rather than just leaving school with nothing.
A powerful body of opinion supports Luke's view. But can we really blend academic learning and vocational training? Can the diploma really work alongside A-levels and GCSEs? In our next programme, we find examples of Tomlinson in action. Now,